Today, we're going to dive into the mind's workbench, that essential mental space we're using, well, literally every single moment. This is the story of working memory.
So, picture this. Someone gives you a phone number. You repeat it to yourself, 555-0123, just for a few seconds while you grab your phone to dial, and then poof, it's gone. What is that temporary mental scratchpad?
Well, that scratchpad is what we call your working memory. But here's the key. It's not just for storage. Think of it more like an active workbench for your mind. It's where you hold information, sure, but it's also where you tinker with it, manipulate it, and use it to get stuff done right now.
But, our understanding of this whole system wasn't always so clear. The entire idea of working memory was actually born from a crisis, a huge crack that appeared in the old accepted model of how memory was supposed to work. See, back in the 60s, the main theory was something called the modal model. It was super simple. It basically saw memory as a one-way street. Information comes into a short-term store, and the longer it hangs out there, the better its chances of making it into long-term memory. Simple enough, right?
Well, then neuropsychology came along and just threw a giant wrench into the works. Researchers started finding these patients who completely broke the rules of this simple pipeline, and it created a puzzle that the old model just couldn't explain.
And here is that puzzle. The model was fine with one kind of patient, people who had amnesia, right? Bad long-term memory, but a pretty decent short-term memory. That fit the model. But then, they found the complete opposite. Patients whose short-term memory was shot. I mean, they could barely remember 2 digits at a time, but who could still form perfectly good new long-term memories. So how in the world could information get into long-term storage if the very gateway to it was broken? This contradiction demanded a whole new theory. So in the 1970s, 2 psychologists, Alan Baddeley and Graham Hitch, designed this absolutely brilliant experiment to figure out what that short-term store was really doing. Now, since these patients were really rare, Baddeley and Hitch got creative. They decided to simulate the condition in healthy students. They'd give them a main task, like reasoning through a sentence, but at the exact same time, they'd make them remember a string of random digits, basically clogging up their short-term memory on purpose. If that old model was right, their ability to reason should have completely fallen apart. But it didn't, not even close. Yeah, people got a little bit slower, but their accuracy was basically unchanged. They could still reason, they could still understand things, they could still learn. And that was the smoking gun. It proved that this short-term store wasn't just one simple gateway. It had to be a much more complex, active system. And this timeline really shows you a scientific revolution happening in fast forward. In just 6 years, the field went from that simple one-way street model to a totally new framework proposed by Baddeley and Hitch in 1974. And they gave it a new name. They didn't call it short-term memory anymore. They called it working memory. Their first model was this awesome multi-part system, like a little team of specialists all working together. So let's meet the 3 original members of that team. All right, first up, you've got the boss, the central executive. You can think of it as the CEO of your mental workspace. Now, it doesn't really store any information itself. Its job is to be the attentional controller. It decides what to focus on, and it coordinates its 2 little assistants. And the first of those assistants is the phonological loop. This is basically your inner voice. It's the part that was repeating that phone number earlier. It keeps sound-based information active by, well, talking to yourself inside your own head. Okay, so that handles sounds. But what about pictures and spaces? Well, Alan Baddeley himself had a real aha moment about this while he was driving in the US and listening to an American football game on the radio. He was picturing the plays so vividly in his head when he suddenly realized he was swerving all over the road. And that experience pointed directly to the second assistant, the visuospatial sketchpad. This is your mind's eye. It's what holds on to visual and spatial information, like imagining a football play. Baddeley realized his mind's eye was so busy watching the game, it was interfering with the very spatial task of, driving safely. Now, this 3-part model was incredibly powerful. I mean, it stood for over 25 years. But science never stops asking questions. And over time, a new puzzle started to emerge. It seemed like the team was missing a key player. The model was great at explaining these separate streams for words and for images. But how do they connect? How does your inner voice talk to your mind's eye to create one single, rich, unified experience? Where was the intersection?
If you look at that original 1974 model, you can see the CEO directing its two specialists. But there's no dedicated place for information from these different sources to actually meet up and create something new.
So in the year 2000, Bodley updated the model. He added a fourth component that acts as that missing link, the integrator for the whole system, the episodic buffer.
The episodic buffer is kind of like a temporary mental scrapbook. It's this multi-dimensional space that can pull information from your inner voice, your mind's eye, and from your long-term memory, and it binds it all together into a single coherent episode. It's basically the mental stage where our conscious awareness actually happened. Okay, so that's the cool scientific story of how a model evolves. But so what? Why does any of this actually matter in our everyday lives? Well, it turns out this model has massive real-world implications. It helps explain everything from how we learn a new language, that's the phonological loop hard at work, to how we do mental math. In medicine, it's led to incredible new ideas, like using games like Tetris to disrupt traumatic visual memories in PTSD patients. It even helps us spot early warning signs for Alzheimer's and better understand things like dyslexia. So, when you get right down to it, working memory isn't just a place, it's a process. It's not some dusty storage closet in your brain. It is the active, dynamic mental stage where our thoughts and our memories and our actions all come together. It is, quite literally, where thinking happens. We've mapped out the workspace and we've met the team, but the biggest mystery of all remains the director of the whole show, that central executive. Really understanding our mental CEO is the next great frontier in this field. So what's next on its agenda? Well, that's the question that's going to drive the next 50 years of research.